This is Robert Clotworthy, and you are listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Here are your hosts, James McQuiston, Oak Island theorist and author, along with John Hamels, PhD and historical researcher. Get the whole story right here, brought to you by Rabbit Hole Investigations.
Hello everyone, I'm Doc Hamels and welcome to episode 11 of Oak Island Plus. And with me today as always is
Jim McQuiston. And you know, Doc, these get more complicated, but they get more fun.
Oh, absolutely. Month. I look forward to these, and we seem to be getting more popular every month.
I know. We have 22,000 views somewhere around there.
I know, and we're almost 700 subscribers, and we'll talk about that maybe later. Jim, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, back when I was writing Oak Island Curses, Codes, and Secret Societies, I was contacted by a gentleman named David Neeson, and he was approaching Oak Island from a new point of view, which was the botany, basically the plants, recorded historically or what might still be there. And one of those was the famous Oak Island trees that you see right up here between us.
Right.
And he's a retired military intelligence officer for the Navy, the Army, and NSA.
Yeah, he's been in electronics. He's an entrepreneur in his own right. He was in intelligence. I've got him doing like computers and that sort of thing. So he's pretty broad background in a lot of areas.
But one thing he's not is a botanist.
Right.
So he put together a team of 44 arborists and botanists to study these plants, and in particular, the Oak Island trees. And so that's what we're going to talk to him about today. And what it appears on the surface from our Zoom that we did with him is that he's presenting pretty much irrefutable proof of the travel of those trees from the Holy Land to France to Scotland to Oak Island. And we're going to let him tell most of the story, but it's an amazing one.
You know, before we go to David here, I just want to let folks know that I hopefully will show this as towards the end of the show, is that he's published, right?
Yes.
I mean, this isn't just sitting around, and his coffee table coming up with stuff. I mean, he's worked with these various botanists, and I think he's got 4 different publications on the matter. And the thing, his claim to fame, though, Jim, is harassing you every Friday. Is that true?
Yeah.
What's that all about?
He likes to kid.
Okay.
But we didn't know when we started the Zoom with him what it was going to be like, but he turned out to be a very serious fellow.
Absolutely.
And I think his first book, anyway, was like 700 pages. Plus, he had an addendum online of 300 more pages.
Oh my gosh.
If you doubted or questioned or whatever one of his points, you could go to the addendum online and look up his sources. So he's extremely thorough, which you would expect from a military intelligence type of a guy. And he's got a lot of data, which you would expect from having a team of 44 botanists and arborists.
So what do you say? Let's get to David.
Yes, let's show the Zoom meeting.
Okay.
Hi, David. Hello, how are you doing?
Great. Doc's with us here.
Hello, David. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Doc.
We're looking forward to the show, and my question that I've had for quite a while is whatever possessed you to head down this road of investigating Oak Island in a way that nobody else has ever seemed to do, with legitimate study of the botany, I guess you call it.
Well, about 6 years ago, several of my friends, retired friends, we would sit around on Sunday and review the Curse of Oak Island episode.
Yeah.
And we kept looking at those initial pictures. Say, what are those trees? Those don't look like oak trees. And we kicked the can around and we talked. And then I had some arborist friends who got involved in the conversation. And well, we all started sending each other pictures back and forth. And we saw some trees that looked similar in Australia and elsewhere. And finally, I said, I'm going to do some more research. And I hired a botanist out in LA and engaged these other arborists to try to tell me what kind of tree this is. And I put together a package and I sent them through an envelope, large 8 by 11 photographs of those little trees. And they all came back to me with kind of a varied answer. Well, they're not oak, but I can't tell what they are, or they could be this, or they could be that. And a lot of experts seem to not really want to commit, especially when you're trying to solve a riddle like this. So I went further and I decided I was going to research it and write a book. And I wasn't really quite sure what the trees were. I was almost finished with what I thought was going to be the book, and one of the arborists sent me a photograph. And you have it. It's the trees on the Isle of Reay. But we did not know where that was. We had the photo, but we had no idea where it came from, who owned it, how could we get more information. I reached out.
Let's zoom down through some of those
Sure.
photos you sent me. Starting with the Oak Island ones, we have that great one from 1897, and that was the year three big things happened on the island. That actually shows the most trees of all the Oak Island shots, and that was the year that someone, Maynard Kaiser, I think was his name, fell in one of the pits and died. He was the second one. That was the year they found the gold chains, and that was the year they found the little piece of parchment. So that's a significant photo for those reasons, but also because it shows the biggest chunk of those trees. And then you sent another one that was from the Bowden, Henry or Harry Bowden, they call them both. He was a relative of Franklin Roosevelt, and you can see some of his equipment there. That's a pretty cool shot too. But that starts getting down to where a lot of them seem to be dying off. And then
there's some other photographs. Actually, if you looked at the one that says Oak Island 1897, and you see how the ground below it has been completely, there was a stand of spruce that were growing below it. They're all cut back, and you see how the island is rock strewn, and they didn't do any agriculture on this part of the island. So these trees have been there. They weren't cut down, and you'd have to say to yourself, well, they're oak, and they were looking for oak. Why not cut them down? What you do see on some of the later pictures of the Bowden expedition is there were small shrubs underneath those trees, and those were actually the saplings.
Oh yeah,
would have grown to replace the sycamore, but they cut them all down because they had turned that area into being a grazing land. So that's how come they eventually died, because they cut down all the saplings that were growing below those sycamore trees.
And I know that they spoke about that somehow those trees they think that they might have been venerated because they think that they were the reason why it got called Oak Island. And so they didn't want to cut down the main reason why, I guess. But they did eventually all apparently die and fall over. I think by 1951, they say they're pretty much were all
yes,
gone.
At first, I didn't want to go with a venerated issue because I wanted a botanical answer.
Yes.
And once I found the Isle of Reay and I found out how old those trees were, I got an idea that these trees aren't having a problem living on Isaac's Point here. They're doing quite well, and that's when I looked into their smaller shrubs and that they were being cut down, and that's basically what happened. Is that these trees that we're seeing here in this first photograph, they basically died of old age, and the new trees never were allowed to grow to replace them. So that's why they died. And the last tree that I actually saw was in a Bill Burr episode of Treasure, where he featured Oak Island.
Really?
And they said that the original curse was once the last oak tree dies, the secret will be revealed. Now, because I don't buy them as oaks, I do have a frame captured from that video, and it shows a few little fall leaves on this dead snag that had fallen over. And my botanist says he doesn't think those are oak leaves. So again, we have reason why not to believe them as oak. But getting back to Race Isle.
Well, let's take a look at two more pictures first before we jump to the fun thing. So the next shot down shows them when they're starting to die off, and you had guesstimated an earliest date they could be planted would be 1622, and probably the latest, just based on history of the island, would be 1752. So, but you can see already that when this shot was taken, they're starting to disappear. There's only a few out on the point. Here we are on the beautiful Isle of Reay. And I actually saw this island, but I didn't go to it because I came down that other side of the Isle of Skye, and we were looking over and seeing this island and thinking, wow, that'd be cool to go over there. But, you know, you have to book boats and everything. It's not like something you can just do, you know. And,
right.
And
there's 151 people that live on the island year round.
But down in the lower left,
Google Earth, and we found them again. Oh. And then, of course, the Isle of Reay has a tourist video that they had, and there they were. And there are several stands of them on the island.
So you have like GPS coordinates of these trees?
Yes.
Wow.
So what you're saying, these trees are the same that are on Oak Island?
Yes. These trees were here that we're looking at Reay. How did you pronounce it? Reay? I thought it was Reay Isle, but
well, however you're saying is probably closer than me. Reay.
This stand has been there, was written about in 1773 by a famous Scottish travel writer. And he wrote about them when he visited the MacLeod family. MacLeod family.
MacLeod.
Right. So it became obvious that, well, these we know are Acer sycamore, Acer platanus. So why not they be that on Oak Island? People came from these isles and settled in Nova Scotia. And we looked at the reason why no one has discovered these trees is simply because if you were to pull open a book and look up European sycamore, they're very large, broad, robust trees. They make oaks look like a wimpy tree. These were brought and used throughout Europe as windbreaks for fields and growing agriculture. So I never saw a tree that looked like these labeled a European sycamore until I started to discover other places in the Scottish Isles and the British Isles along the coast that were windswept. And then we saw lots and lots of the European sycamore that had basically morphed to this shape and feature.
You mentioned how settlers from that area came over to Nova Scotia. And on this next slide, you'll see this is close to my heart because this is where my family actually came from. But number one on this chart is the Isle of Reay. We'll say it Reay.
Okay.
And right next to that is the big Isle of Skye, and that's where my family came from. And so if you look at number 2 on there, that's a peninsula at the bottom. That's where the current Premier Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia traces back to the MacDonalds of that area. There were the MacUshton, which became my name, McQuiston. But anyway, the Ushton MacDonald family, that's his family. And that's why he has the Premier Knighthood of Baronet of Nova Scotia. And then if you look around the three, which is right across from Reay on the opposite way, that's where his mother was born. So you can see that it circles Reay Island. 4 is the Trotternish Peninsula where Castle Ushton is, and the Bishop of the Isles served there for 500 years. And in the graveyard of the church that he served at are 2, what they believe are Templar graves. So now that puts the Knights Templar right smack in the middle of this whole thing. And then finally on the map at number 5, that's Dunvegan Castle. That's been in the MacLeod family for, I believe, 800 years. So you can see that this is the MacLeods and the McDonalds intermarried. They fought each other, whatever, typical clan intrigue or whatever. But these were key people to the whole Nova Scotia story. William Alexander was a McDonald, and he was, so there's a absolute connect of this land of these trees that you found to the history of Nova Scotia. Not only the fact that they look like them, but the fact that there's historic. So this next slide is actually those trees.
On number 3, for example, is Portencross, and many of those sycamore trees that were along the agricultural fields, right on the edge of the cliff down to the ocean below, you can literally see the row of sycamore where they've been blown into this morphed shape. So most of my other photographs are from Portencross, which is over near. Let's see, what do you have here? You have
Applecross.
Yeah. Applecross. So it's a little bit south of Applecross, if I'm correct.
So we're thinking that they planted these as windbreaks on windswept islands.
Well,
to some degree.
I'm more the belief that they saw them morphed, and they saw that they're unique and that there's no other trees like that. And I think they took them there to be a flag, because they are so different, even because they would have known that a European sycamore farther inland wouldn't morph into that tall, lanky canopy tree. It would be that large, fully grown out tree that they use for a windbreak. So I think they decided that they wanted to take those trees because they would be unique, that they would take them there. No one would recognize them per se. They wouldn't look like a tree from home, a plane tree, or whatever the dozen names that they were called. It could have been that they thought that they were going to be a great windbreak, but they would have already known that. Look at the Isle of Reay, say. Those don't look like windbreaks to me. They look like very tall, very strange trees. And if you were to
and there, I believe you were the one that told me about 2 of them that are beyond the Isle of Reay, which are one that Mary Queen of Scots planted at Scone, which was the old crowning area of Scotland. That's where they were originally crowned. And then there's one on the land of the family Forester. And why that becomes significant is that Andrew Forester was 3rd in charge of the Knights Baronet settlers. And when they had to leave, they left about 50 men behind, and he was their leader. And then the French eventually caught him later that year and sent him back. So the Forester family, having a similar tree to what's on Oak Island on their land in Scotland, is, again, just another crazy coincidence, if it's a coincidence at all.
But listen, James, how could it be a coincidence? These people migrate to Nova Scotia.
Right.
They denude the entire province. They're cutting down trees for masts, and they're looking for oak type wood for their ships and everything like that. But no one touches these trees.
Right.
Those people who came there, they knew that those were special trees. For whatever reason, whether it be biblical or Templar related, or the group of people that went there and set up new Ross, these were unique trees and no one accosted them. No one cut them down for wood or timber. They just let them go.
Yeah.
Why is that? That's beyond me.
And even in later centuries, people talked about them being a signal that you were near Oak Island or, near that area. It was a landmark. They were planting their own landmark. Well, let's look at that close up of that Isle of Reay then. This is the lower corner of that larger shot. And I saw in your list that they were also have been called Scottish maple and Celtic maple, which fits the story. We're always looking for something that fits the story. You can't fit any better than that.
That's true.
And they have this lifespan of 300 to 550 years, which fits most of the story of Oak Island, unless you delve way back into the Vikings or the Templars or whatever, but most of it fits that. So what I did, when you first, I think it was 2021, maybe when you first approached me with this.
Yes, I had just gotten the information at the end of 2020, and I think I contacted you in January, February of 2021.
Okay, that makes sense. And so I was so excited. So I took that photo that you gave me and I picked out a set of 2 trees. And you can see on the next slide how I drew the red circle around them. Those are my 2 trees. And then you had sent me this photo too. This is the I think it's the only color photo of the trees. I'm not sure, but it's the only one I remember seeing.
This is a colored photo. So
it's colored.
If you've seen the photo of the operation where the pit is, and they've got sacks and how it's been touched up color wise, this is a similar kind of coloration.
Okay.
So it was a black and white, and someone long ago colored it, perhaps for another postcard.
They did that a lot, and probably for a postcard. Yeah, they did that a lot. Well, as you can see, this must be towards the dying days of the trees, because one of the main ones right out on the point is gone. And so that I thought that's the perfect place to stick a Isle of Reay, a Reay tree in that spot. And so on the very next slide, you can see that I did that. And I had printed this in black and white in my a book about that time. But even being in color, it's even more dramatic. That there's just nobody, I don't care how much of an enthusiast of Oak Island you are, that would look at that and say, that one tree is from Scotland, the rest of them are from Oak Island, So that pretty much dramatizes this whole situation. So this Dr. Bungard seems like he was pretty critical to your study. Can you tell us a little bit about him and how you ran into him and all that?
Sure. It was winter time, and I contacted the reservation desk at the Reay house, and of course they were closed because I didn't realize this is such a small island and only 151 people there, and then probably 10 feet of snow. So I was thinking the Shining or something, but I left a message, and someone forwarded to Elizabeth MacLeod, the wife of the owner of the property. And she'd asked me if I would send them a photo of the trees that I had asked for. As a matter of fact, I had said to her, I can pull it up. Did you lose me temporarily?
No, you're there.
Okay, so I asked her. It was one of those kind of questions where you're just filling out a blank form, and it says, I seek to hire someone to help me identify a small stand of canopied trees along the shoreline in a large open area of the island. I can send a photo taken of the trees in 2019. If there are similar trees, we'll pay for information on them. Serious offer, no joke. Thanks. So she responded, hi, David. Thank you for your email. If you would like to send the photo and a bit more information, we might be able to help. Best wishes, Elizabeth. So I did that, and she said, I forwarded the photos onto one of our residents to ask if there is anything historically significant or any lore associated with the trees of your photos. I'll get back to you if anything of interest. And the next email was Dr. Bungard responding. He had
Oh,
gotten the request because he lives less than a quarter of a mile away from those trees.
wow, what a
Eh, Talk about
stroke
being
of
lucky.
luck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So, being the owner, I got the okay to have them investigated. We even tried to organize a year and a half ago now to have sections of them sent to Oak Island to the fellowship, and that I
really?
would pay for it. But I never got a response back. So I
Uh,
even gave them the name of Dr. Bungard, like, okay, if you don't want me involved, you contact them. Unfortunately, they had already done that episode where they planted oaks on Oak Island
yeah.
with the Restall related relatives, and I think they felt that what are we going to gain by discovering it's a different tree? And we have nothing really here to verify that, so we're not going to go there.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, in retrospect, they didn't realize what they had to gain, which was additional proof of this Scottish connection. But,
Yeah.
uh, you know, coincidentally, just as we were getting ready for the Zoom, I got a oddball email through one of my oddball email addresses. I don't know why I got it, but it was about trees and about how they represent resilience. And I thought, wow, how coincidental, because that's kind of what we're talking about. These are trees planted on windswept shorelines that are standing the test of time for their entire botanical lifespan anyway, and people are leaving them alone. And so maybe it was simply out of reverence for their resilience that it represented, hey, they can do it, we can do it.
You know
So,
what? Though I hear that, I had never heard of an European sycamore before, and I did not know they are now the single largest species of tree in the British Isles, in the
wow.
UK, because they were brought over. Supposedly, I've even heard stories that they were brought from seeds from during the Crusades, that when they
Could
came
be.
back from the Crusades, they couldn't bring a branch or a tree, and there was no fruit at the time. So they brought back the seeds, which are called helicopter seeds, because they made them into a game because the way they float in the
Like
air.
a maple, yeah.
Part of my research shows that people misunderstood what the tree species was. They thought the sycamore was the sycomore, which is a fig tree of the Bible, because the sycamore, European sycamore, has two round or has round sex organs on them, and from a distance they look like unripe figs. So they made the mistake of thinking it was a sycomore. And then there's some other historical evidence which ties it into the Egyptians and to the plane tree. And if you notice, the name, the Latin name is Acer, which is a spear, which the Egyptians had in their uh, worshiping of their gods, and pseudoplatanus, pseudo being fake, platanus being plane trees. So there's a whole lot of history in the UK of these worship trees throughout Scotland and Wales and England. And I sent you a list of these famous names, one of them being the sycamore of Hadrian's Wall that unfortunately was recently cut down. So there was a lot of people back then who worshiped these trees, either thinking they were biblically connected, and I do have some Templar tie-ins, but I didn't know if we wanted to go there. I believe these trees were revered, that they were selected for their unique shape. They were selected because they were from their homeland, and they were from, in their mind, from the Levant, from the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So these trees have a much longer history than I had thought they had.
Well, it wouldn't be out of place for them to be brought back from the Crusades, because there's also a story that Theobald Navarre, who had led the Barons' Crusade, brought back the grapes to France that are used in Champagne. And supposedly he brought back 2 or 3 things inside of his Templar helmet so he could make sure he got home with them safe and sound. So, I mean, it's I was looking at that slide there of Dr. Bungar, and boy, he's done some amazing things. He's an officer of the Botanical Society of the UK. He's in charge of that whole area, Skye and Reay and what they call the Small Isles. And he's written a couple books. And so I don't think you could have found, again, maybe it's one of those Oak Island coincidences, but I don't think you could have found a better person in the whole wide world.
No, I was
study those trees for
very
you.
lucky.
And so that's just wonderful. And I love this is what you told me for back when I did that one book. I don't even honestly remember what book it was in, but
it was a curses code.
Oh, yeah, because of Mary Queen of Scots.
77 and 78.
Oh, wow, you got it right down. Okay. Well, because he said that one of the legends about the trees was that Mary Queen of Scots, not maybe her specifically, but her entourage, brought them back when she returned in 1561 from France to come back and accept her monarchy of Scotland, which was ill-fated in the end. And that's when she planted that one at Scone. So that's what piqued my interest at the time. But just this whole idea that these, not just in the Isle of Skye area, but now you're telling us all over England and Wales and Scotland that they were revered trees, and history or tradition has always said they were revered trees on Oak Island. That's just been part of the story there. So everything's making sense.
And I would go from Mary Queen of Scots, I would go back that as she got them in France, they were brought from the Levant. Everyone was looking for something of the Crusades to show and to bring back. And most of that was deposited in France. And I think there's I haven't found it because I wasn't going down that track, but there's a link between Mary Queen of Scots, the tree, back to the Crusades, and the Knights Templar, and that entire thing. And
well, I know she was absolutely related to some Templars. So this all just makes absolute sense. It's another historical trail which has a new angle to it of botany. And it's just fabulous. This is just fabulous. I hope the day comes when you get a call from the Oak Island team saying, hey, come up and tell us about this.
There's more information that I can't tell you right now because I haven't gotten permission to tell you that ties in her to Oak Island vis-a-vis trees.
Wow. That's great. Well, you can break the news here today if you want, or
I'll simply say that it's part of hidden codes and things like that, and that the translation is Mary Queen of Scots, and it floored me when I saw that, and I thought, you have got to be kidding me. So I've been itching to tell you. I've asked for permission to let you know, but because we've moved this up a little bit in filming, you may have to add it in part of your editing before airtime.
Well, Carmen did the same thing to us because we interviewed him. He said, well, we found a couple other Scottish items. Oh, wait a minute. Well, I think we did. And they're going to be talking about your theory, whatever. So one of these, I wasn't in the service. I respect everybody that was. But one thing I always heard was there was a lot of hurry up and wait.
Oh, yeah.
And that has been the story of my association with the Oak Island team since 2016. It has been hurry up and wait. And yet people like you and me and Doc, we're like, we literally work into the wee hours of the morning. I mean, we're not waiting for anything, and we're texting each other. I just found this. Can you believe this? Oh, I'll look into it further.
Yeah.
That just happened this morning. Before this thing, we somebody sent us a new. He's going to be a guest down the road. And he sent us a new idea, and I called Doc and said, "You're not going to believe it, but look, there's another rabbit hole we got to go down." But this is just fantastic. This. The Crusaders up to France. Mary Queen of Scots is in France, marries the French king. He passes away. She goes back up to Scotland. Apparently, some of these trees come with her. People from Scotland go over and settle Nova Scotia, and there's the connect of some of them directly to Oak Island and to areas right around Oak Island. And ta-da!
What do you know of Mary Queen of Scots going to Nova Scotia?
That I know nothing of, but I would love to know. I don't know when she could have gone. I hadn't, there have been so many books written about her. I had a bunch of them for a while, gave them away, but,
you almost can't believe what you read nowadays because of the attempt back then to hide things and to communicate in other methods. I'm not hanging my hat on that part of the story because I know one thing: plants. And so it's much easier to know a tree is a tree, a plant is a plant, and the people, that's much harder to trace. So I took an easy route by going by plants.
Well, and everybody approaches Oak Island from a different point of view. Yours is trees and botanical items. Mine's because I was always into family history. I went to Scotland 3 times into Northern Ireland and Ireland, all because of family history. And so that's my angle to it. But you've been able to discover a lot, and I've been able to discover a lot. And Doc's tagged in on this because he's so fascinated by just this expanding history.
And I come from a different perspective.
Yeah, he's hidden. He has a hidden membership he may not want to mention, but and that's driving part of what he's doing. So and then other people do that too. I mean, we're not alone in that. Some people like to look at the stars and whatever, but I try to stay grounded in actual documents and all that, and that's why your theory appealed to me so much in the beginning, because it was practical, it was pragmatic, it wasn't some kind of mystical magical thing. It was like, and that's where I always try to stay in that realm, because you can go way off track if you start getting into
and James, I was wrong. When I started that book, I thought I knew for sure it was the Pinus pinea, which is a pine tree, often called the Roman pine, or the Italian pine, or the umbrella pine. And it's a tree that I know the Courgeon Mall likes to herald, but it's not. But I was going to print when I got that picture from Reay Isle. And what irritated me is I assumed that a tree that looks this way will look this way no matter where it's planted.
True.
And I was wrong. And I had read up on the botany, and that no, there are trees that have morphed, and their morphology, the tropisms that have affected them in the same condition, in the same type of environment, will be the same, which is how we got to the, I didn't know it was a European sycamore until they said, those are European sycamore. I said, you got to be kidding me. The pictures doesn't look like that. It's the morphology. And that's why at Portland-Cross and elsewhere in the British Isles, in Scotland, very windy, where these trees are subject to the same kind of weather conditions that have morphed them all.
So it's windy coastal,
salt breeze
type situation. And
so when you look at I think I sent you the Portland-Cross pictures as well. You could literally see 2 trees. The one closest to the water looks like an Oak Island, or partially like an Oak Island tree, and the one 50 yards away from it, protected by the wind by that tree looks like a normal European sycamore.
Huh.
And it's and I found place after place along the ocean where these trees exist, and there are other stands on Race Island as well. But there's the one of on the little roadway there where all the trees look exactly the same as Oak Island. Again, it's because of the morphology that happens from these different tropisms, which is just basic condition, a word for conditions that
Yeah.
have morphed the tree. And so they're growing in Oak Island. This is the other reason why it's a better link. They look exactly like those Race Island trees because they're in the exact same environment. If they were planted up at New Ross, well, they
Wouldn't
wouldn't look
notice
like
them.
that at all.
It'd be interesting for somebody to go up to New Ross and look around for some
Well,
European sycamores and see if they're nice full trees, or although up there they might have got cut down because they weren't unique
right.
looking or anything.
Technically, supposedly, the European sycamore wasn't introduced to the United States until I think it was 1870. Um, and then it was later into parts of New England and Canada, not until like 1920. So officially, that tree didn't even belong in the Western Hemisphere. Oak Island was the first place that it was found.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, just to highlight the morphology of it, before we got you on the screen, we had shown a photo of what we labeled as the Oak Island trees. It's a beautiful photo you sent us, but it wasn't the Oak Island trees. It was a little trick on our viewers because here is that same photo and it's labeled the Isle of Reay trees. And I tell you, anybody that's watched Oak Island, seen these old photos, investigated, I defy anybody to prove the opposite, prove that they aren't the same trees. And the work you've done is just fantastic.
Well, I appreciate that, but looks can be deceiving. So I had to get into the taxonomical characteristics
Yeah.
of the tree. I had to, with Dr. Bungard's help, the leaves, the seeds, the bark, they all tell the same story that we see in those old pictures of Oak Island. So I can I went through and eliminated the native trees first in the North England Acadian forest because why couldn't one of those trees morph this way?
Oh,
Well, they could kind of, and there are trees up near Halifax that kind of look like them, but those are oak trees, but they're not. They haven't morphed really just like them, even though they're right there on the coast. Why? Different species. And so I'm not just chasing a pretty tree. There's a lot of pretty trees that look like those on Oak Island to a degree, but you have to have the right circumstances and the basic taxonomy of the tree. I mean, a willow is not going to grow up like a spruce tree, no matter where it's planted. You see what I'm saying?
yeah.
And a spruce tree or a fir is not going to grow like an oak tree, no matter what you do to it. So there is you can't just go with a picture, but it sure did get us to the right spot.
Yeah. Well, this is fantastic. I'm so glad that you agreed to be on the program, and we're really anxious and looking forward to whatever new venture you have going that you can't quite tell us about yet, but that's okay. And we do want to have you back for the coconut core or fiber, whatever you want to call it, because there's some connections there too, and the
Yes.
red clover that was said to be planted on top of the Money Pit area, which has its own story to be
Yes,
told. So this is just so neat. It's a scientific approach that nobody else that I've ever heard has ever done this. They've talked about the tree. I think one episode they had one leaf that somebody swore was from one of those oak trees that somebody had saved or something, but
Right.
there's never been enough evidence to prove anything until now.
Well, Lee Lamb brought it to the show, showed it to a biologist who I've written to and who I've sent my package to, and he simply said that it's not a northern red oak. it is an oak leaf, but it's so deteriorated that they can't do any kind of testing. And where this leaf was found was one day Robert Restall had dug a new pit, and the next day this leaf was in that pit. There were no similar leaves in the entire area, so he thought, well, maybe it was from because they had put a lot of a leaf and branch material down inside some of these pits when they had dug them up, and he thought, well, maybe it was from one of the original trees. So it didn't really prove anything other than the fact that it was not a northern red oak,
Yeah.
and he couldn't do anything more with it. That was that
And
one.
he was working there, 15 years almost after the last Oak
Pulling up,
Island quote
pulling up
oak
coconut fiber.
fell.
Yeah,
So he would, it could have been from any tree at that point.
you're
It's
right.
just a shame that something wasn't made out of it, or somebody didn't keep a log of it for landscaping or something that they could
But we
just
do
go
know
do a test.
sometimes from the lack of information, no one talked about the beautifully colored oak leaves on those trees. Why? Because
Oh,
the European sycamore doesn't produce a colorful array during the fall. It's kind of a grayish looking leaf and then it falls off and dies. So you didn't get that. And when it came to the image of the island being covered with these trees, no. But from Chester, and if you looked out towards Oak Island, on the very far end was the eastern drumlin, and you could see those tall trees which grew above the canopy of the rest of the trees. Oak trees won't grow above the normal canopy.
that's right.
So here you had these foreign trees growing taller than the rest of the canopy on Oak Island. There are oak trees on Oak Island right now that are old growth Oak Island trees. So
And they're not canopy trees like that.
right, they're on lot 5. There's 28 of them.
Well, and two things that we're up against. You mentioned one of them earlier, but and that one being that some historians, I think they want to tell their story, so they lead into their story with information that's not accurate. That's like the mainstream run of the mill stuff, but it's not really accurate. And then they tell their story from there, but that
It
just
sets their course.
perpetuates the falseness
Right.
of it. And the other thing is you get a lot of skepticism about the written word accounts of Oak Island and all that from the past. But those people were just basically they were farmers that were wrapped up in this thing, but they weren't scientists. There was no historical society. There were no scientists, period, behind their work. They were just writing down what they saw and they heard, and they would have no reason to lie. What are they going to do? Have a conspiracy and say, okay, it's 1854 and we're going to write something down today so that 200 years from now somebody's going to believe something. They just weren't doing that. They were just recording
And
what.
they didn't have the science back. They didn't have dendrochronology. They didn't
Yeah.
have every new tree that they didn't recognize was called an oak tree because most oak trees were cut down in the UK. Those were special forests left just for the naval department. So, finding an oak was kind of unique. And when you did find an oak, it had a special name. It was not, there weren't forests of oak back in those days.
Oh, they were
They had
specifically
been
named
denuded.
because
They
they're
had been
so
cut
rare.
down for ships and for other things. And so in the UK, it was a matter of well, you had your Scottish fir, and then you had these acer plants. And for a while there, they were going to eradicate them because they thought they were an invasive species because they were growing everywhere. No, people were planting them for, I think, both religious reasons and farming reasons. They created that windstop. And so you're right. You get to a new world and you don't know what those trees are. So, well, it looks like an oak. It doesn't have the bark of a pine tree. So
Yeah.
therefore it's an oak.
And some I get tired of the skeptics, but I realize everybody has to be reasonably skeptical. But I look for things that, well, what would be the alternative story? And so in one case that I can cite is that one of the early newspaper accounts said that the 90-foot stone was there to be viewed by people at John Smith's home. Well, you're going to put that in your newspaper, and then 1,000 people are going to go out to Oak Island, and it's not going to be there, and they're going to come back and raid your newspaper office and say, why are you saying stuff like that? Well, it's the same way with this morphology of these trees. There aren't other trees that morph in this way. And just that fact alone should prove the whole story. Just that, you know. So anyway, we're so happy to have had you here today. And I don't know, in closing, is there anything else you'd want the viewers of this to know, or
As far as your story goes, I think there's much more with the Mary Queen of Scots, and I'm appalled by the new findings. Appalled in a good way. Very, very excited.
Can't wait.
I'm hoping that the person who has shared this with me authorizes me to tell you, because I'm starting to feel that all of these theories are actually true. That through the historical line of the way things developed, the Knights Templar, Freemasonry, that all of these theories have touched on a part of this train, all leading to Oak Island. And I think that we each have the benefit of telling a part of that. Either maybe it's a car on that train or a part of the track that it went through, but it gets us to Oak Island.
Well, and that's the research Doc and I have been doing on this, what we're calling the multi-generational conspiracy of elites, which those words were actually used on Oak Island, but in one of the Oak Island shows. But these are real people. They were related to each other. They were involved in North American settlement. They were involved in knighthoods. They were involved in Freemasonry. And again, you have to ask the question, what's the alternative story? If you take these facts, I'm not talking if you make up, I won't say make up, but if you devise some theory, off the wall theory, aliens, let's say, and dinosaurs did it or something, you know, but take these facts and tell us a different story, because there isn't a different story. This is the story.
That's right. And I think that those who they seem to glom onto one little thing, like, well, there could not have been a big tree with a branch over it. Okay, that's fine. That may have been part with a block and tackle. That may have been part of the lore.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a money pit, and that there weren't platforms, and that there wasn't coconut fiber or a fiber underground. We found it. It's there. It's provable. So you can't dismiss the baby with the bathwater, like so many like to do.
And you know, another thing along that line is that these trace elements of silver and gold that they're finding are typical for a lot of places around Nova Scotia and other places. But Rick Lagina showed me an actual piece of iron with actual gold rubbed on the side of it that they pulled up from depth. Now, how do you explain that? That's not all over the place. That's not all over Nova Scotia or all over the world. So something happened. I know everybody says this, it's the old fallback position, but something happened underground. What it is, you and I and Doc, we're trying to figure it out from above ground.
There's a lot of smart people who've been working this case, and they wouldn't have been working it if they weren't smart people.
Thank you.
Let's end on that. Let's end on that note. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And hopefully this all goes well, and you'll be seeing all of it soon on YouTube. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Jim, I don't know about you, but that was like mind-blowing. I mean, when he presented it step by step by step, much the way we do when we're talking about the multi-generational conspiracy of elites, we peg out every single year span of things, and he did the same thing, didn't he?
Yes. And this is really the first time, I believe, that anybody's offered any evidence about where the trees
I've
came
seen
from.
nothing, right?
And it's pretty irrefutable again.
You know, I was thinking about what he was talking about, how people would plant trees from, as they're moving along. I don't know if you did this when you were kids or your parents did this, but we would go visit a relative and they say, "Can I have a snip of that?" And they would take a snip of some plant, and the next thing you know, it's coming from Batavia to Buffalo to Ripley to Corey to wherever. Am I right? People do that. So this isn't like, something that was pretty unusual, but it was an interesting story to say the least, and it supports everything we've been saying, right?
And the fact that it appears that they were revered when they were lumbering the rest of Oak Island. They left those trees alone and let them pretty much die on their own. And so there must have been some reasoning behind it, whether they all knew the reason or whether they just were in awe of these lofty trees. Whatever it was, they remained until they fell.
The word that I took away from Dave's presentation with us was the word morph. If I'm not mistaken, the way he used it was that these trees were the only trees in the world that, if they were planted near the coast with salt water and lots of wind, they would look like that.
Right.
Was that your takeaway as well? So I had never even considered that trees would look different over time. And so I thought that was a pretty compelling argument that these trees were the same trees over time.
So next month, we're going to be exploring another knighthood that ran in parallel, just like you spoke a month or two ago. Mm-hmm. It ran in parallel with the Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia, with pretty much the same end in mind. They wanted to settle the area around Nova Scotia. And we don't want to tip our hand too much on it, but we've got a lot of evidence on that. We got some work to do on it yet. And then past that, we are going to do a show completely on Mary, Queen of Scots, because of what information we found out in this show and what information I dug up with her cipher code. So we've already got the next two shows planned, and we're looking forward to working on them and presenting them.
And we're staying in our track. We're not bouncing around. We're not going here, there, and everywhere. We're staying true. I want to do a couple quick things, Jim. I want to thank everyone that started subscribing to our page on YouTube. We're almost at 700. Our goal is 1,000. So thank you. And as we sit now, we're just about at 22,000 views, which to me is mind-boggling. And I want to thank Randy Burt, who's our cameraman here today, and of course Innovation Studio in Westfield, New York, for allowing us to film here. But before we go, you got to talk about this picture that you put up here.
Well, I don't know if anybody noticed as we were talking, but it no longer says Oak Island trees. It says Isle of Reay trees. It's the same trees, and that shows you how somebody could believe that the Oak Island trees were the same as the ones in Scotland.
Okay, folks, so we're going to present the facts for you to think about, and we welcome your comment. Yes. I'm Doc Hamels. I'm going to see you next time.
Jim McQuiston. We'll see you next month.
This is Robert Clotworthy, and you have been listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Be sure to catch every episode.